It is a little confusing for me to be Russel Yee here with Russel Moy. It's actually even more confusing because back in California we have a third friend, Russel Jung. And he's also in Asian American Studies. He's a professor at San Francisco State University and also a Christian. Actually, he and I are at the same church. And so Russel's Jung, Moy, and Yee. And Russel is a little bit of an unusual name, so it's fun that the three of us get to do some of these things together. But you get two of them today, Russel Moy, Russel Jung. 2 years ago, I was able to get into print a book, Worship on the Way, Exploring Asian North American Christian Experience. And I actually did bring copies. And this, as I hold it in my hand, this is the only book on Asian North American worship so far. It's one of the reasons I really felt motivated to write it because, there just isn't much literature out there. There actually isn't much literature in general on Protestant worship from a more free church perspective, not a liturgical perspective, a free church perspective. And one of the reasons I went into free church, the study of free church worship, is to try to help fill that gap of scholarship when it comes to worship in Protestant free church traditions. And there's nothing on Asian American Christian worship. And so I felt compelled to write this book. And about half the book is about Asian American worship. The other half is really about worship and culture generally. So the whole question of the relationship of worship and culture. And I actually could have probably sold a lot more books if I just written a very general book about worship and culture, which would have been a good book. But I felt there had to be at least one book out there. You've got your African American worship books, and you've got your Latino worship books, and so on and so on. There's got to be at least one book out there for Asian, North American, Pacific worship. And so I was able to get this into print, and I did bring it. I'm happy to offer it to you at cost, which is $10, and I have a supply right here. And I don't want to bring any of these home, so I'd be happy for you to pick one of these up at cost, which is $10. Also, if you, especially if you're a younger person and you'd really love to read this and cash is tight for you, I would love to just gift this to you. Like I said, I don't want to bring any of these home. So if you promise to read it and cash is tight, I would be happy for you to just take this and be blessed by it. The title "Worship on the Way" is a takeoff from a prior book, "People on the Way: Asian North Americans Discovering Christ, Culture, and Community," and this was in the 1990s, and it was one of the first collections of essays on Asian North American discipleship. And the way here, what is the way? Why do both these books have the title "The Way"? It's actually an allusion to the Tao. The way, if you're familiar with Taoism, the Tao is the way of all things. It's kind of the underlying reason why the world is the way it is. Why are the heavens above and the earth below? Why are light and dark separate and different? What gives order to the universe? What gives order to right and wrong? Why is everything arranged the way it is? It's because of the Tao. And the Tao unfolds itself, and this is Taoism. And you try to live in harmony with the Tao. And if you try to resist the Tao will fix it for you. and you'll struggle with it until you get it, that you have to just live with the Tao. That's the idea of Taoism, the way. In the Chinese Bible, the same word, the Tao, is used in a very striking place. It's used in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word. Now in English, I think that's actually not very strong. It's not that meaningful. In the beginning was the Word. Well, in English, what are words? Well, words are things, on a piece of paper or in a dictionary. In the beginning was something you find in a dictionary. Well, it doesn't really hit you. But in Chinese, it's translated, "In the beginning was the Tao." And that's actually, I think, much closer to the idea of the Greek, which is "in the beginning was the Logos," right? And in Greek, the Logos was not just something you find in a dictionary. It was this underlying principle of all creation, why things are the way they are, what gives things meaning. And in the beginning was the Logos. And so in the beginning was the Tao. was the way of all things. Now in Taoism, the first thing you learn about Taoism is the Tao you can speak of is not the true Tao. The Tao you can speak of is not the true Tao, because the Tao is so far underneath everything and so deep and so foundational that you can't, even to speak of it is to be on the surface somewhere. You can't speak of it. And so, and then later in John 1, what does John say? And the Logos, the Tao, became flesh and dwelt among us. Well, that is really astonishing. Wow, to say that the Tao became flesh and walked among us, that is breathtaking. That's scandalous. That's crazy, And yet that is the Christian claim. And so the idea of the way, people on the way, worship on the way, as an allusion to this, the Tao. But as well, which is the Logos, which is Jesus Christ, God come in the flesh. But as well, worship on the way. If something is on the way, it means it's not there yet, right? So my family is actually back in California right now. We were at a Christian camp. And when I got on the plane to come here, I forgot I had my key to the cabin at the camp in my pocket, which, you're not supposed to take with you, right? So the first thing I did when I got here was went to the post office to mail it, and hopefully it'll get back before the end of the week, before they have to check out. Otherwise, they charge you whatever, $20. Well, I told my wife, the key is on the way. The key is on the way. It's going to be there Friday or Saturday, hopefully. The key is on the way. And when it comes to Asian, North American, Pacific Asian worship, NAPA worship, I think it's on the way. It's not there yet. If you try to imagine, if I said to you, can you imagine a Black Baptist worship service? Can you imagine a Black Baptist worship service? Well, it'd be easy to imagine. You can imagine the preaching and the call and response, and can I get a witness, and the gospel music and the whole thing. You can imagine. If I ask you to imagine Pacific Asian, North American Pacific Asian worship, does a lot come to mind? Does a lot come to mind? Not a lot. It's on the way. It's still young. It's still being imagined. It's still being discussed. It's still being formed. And so in that sense, worship is on the way as well. It is not there yet. North American Pacific Asian worship is on the way. And whether it gets there depends on people like you and me. It depends on people like you and me. And so, and that's why we're here to talk about this subject. Some years ago, I was in Southern California doing some teaching, and I was staying at an apartment there, and I had to go buy some groceries. And so I happened to find this grocery store. This is in Monterey Park, which is a large majority Asian suburb of Los Angeles, Monterey Park. And actually, there's like 3 different Asian supermarkets right there, right in this intersection. And I thought, good, I can go get my groceries for the week. And so I was walking around inside, and I came to this aisle, and you see there's foam cups and whatnot. And I saw this sign, and I said, oh my goodness. The sign says, worship supplies. Worship supplies. I thought, oh, how cool. Worship supplies. I can buy some communion cups, and I can buy my praise music CDs, and I can buy some Bible, maybe some pew Bibles, maybe, I don't know. Worship supplies, how cool, in an Asian supermarket, that's great. But of course, what was there? What was there? Not communion cups, but this kind of thing, right? These are the kinds of things you use, the paper money, the incense, you use at a place like this. So this is a cemetery in Oakland, California. Especially since about 1970, a lot of new immigrants, a lot of Chinese from Vietnam in Oakland. And you see I didn't see a lot of this growing up, but you see a lot of this now. And these are offerings to the dead, right? And so food that's put out and incense, and you have to keep your ancestors happy, right? You have to keep your ancestors happy, otherwise they cause trouble. You got to keep them well fed, you got to supply them for the afterlife. And these are worship supplies. And if you say Asian American worship, Asian American worship, what comes to mind in people's minds is probably something like this. right? Something more like this than something that happens in your church, my church, on Sunday morning. Well, partly that's because we're just a very young thing in history. Here's the oldest church, the oldest Chinese church. This is the oldest Chinese church in America. The oldest Chinese church in America, Presbyterian Church in Chinatown in San Francisco, and was founded in 1853. So about 160 years old now, 160, 170 years old. Oldest Chinese church in Chinatown. So when this church was just started, there were at least 2 national black denominations, half a century old, right? The entire black experience of slavery, from Jamestown to the Emancipation Proclamation, Jamestown to the Emancipation Proclamation, the black experience of slavery is 244 years. 244 years. And here, Chinese American Christianity is less, it's about 160 years old. It's a century younger than just the African American experience with slavery. Which is to say that the Chinese American church, the Asian American church, the North American Pacific Asian church is pretty young, historically speaking. I mean, I know that seems like ancient history. Some of you were here for the first NAPAD gathering in 1978, I guess it was. I mean, some of you weren't born yet, right? So it seems like, oh my goodness, that must have been, that was before cell phones. Oh my goodness, that was crazy. But historically speaking, it's not that old. 160 years or so, it's just not that old. And so I think of the North American Asian Pacific Church as something of a teenager. We're kind of like a teenager. And if you're a teenager, you're full of energy, you're trying to find yourself, you're exploring the world. You probably don't know all your family stories yet, your family history. You probably don't really have a complete settled sense of yourself, who you are, your identity, and that's okay. I have 2 teenagers, so we're going through this right now. It's okay, who am I? Am I Asian? Am I American? You don't know who you might marry someday. It's just, as a teenager, your identity is still in formation, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think of the North American Pacific Asian Church as kind of a teenager. We're still in formation, still trying to find ourselves, and that's okay. We don't want to get stuck here, but it's okay that we maybe haven't found our voice quite yet. If you go to some of the larger Asian American churches, you might see something like this. So this is New Song Church down in Irvine, in Southern California. New Song Church, Pastor Dave Gibbons. Actually, he and I were classmates at Dallas Seminary. And it's a very kind of young youth, looks like a rock concert kind of thing, right? And great energy, beautiful ministry, I love what they're doing. At the same time, you close your eyes in some of these settings, and would you ever know that you're surrounded by Asian Americans? The music sounds the same as in the majority culture churches. The way they pray, the way they preach, it's pretty majority culture. And that's not all bad, but it's another sign, I think, that we are still trying to find our own voice and our own sense of identity. Now, I have to say, backing up, when I came here last night, and especially with your opening worship service, that was, and here you are, just last night, with your Korean percussion processional, which was great. It was beautiful. And I thought to myself, why am I here? What am I going to tell these folks? Because they already get it. They already get it, that culture matters. And that when you come into a setting, you either feel like you're part of that setting and that you're invited and included and people know your story and recognize you, or you don't, And you guys get it. And right when I walked into the sanctuary last night at the other church, and especially moments like this, to have a full-on processional, not just a processional, but done with skill and energy and young and old together, and as the key moment, when the conference is going to start, that was great. And I turned to my friend Russell here, who's half Korean. I said, have you ever heard this kind of Korean drumming in a church setting before? And he said, I'm not sure I have. Yeah, it's the first time. He's half Korean. You might have seen it at a New Year's celebration or something, but in a church, hey, let's bring our most festive, happy, energized, thing to church. Why not? Absolutely. And that was beautiful. And so I thought to myself, well, why am I even here? Because these guys already got it. Hopefully I can just help you reinforce and explore further this kind of impulse. Even before the processional, as we walked into the worship setting last night, the very first thing I saw, I've never been in this church before, the very first thing I saw was the origami cranes, of course. That's the first thing your eye sees, right? And immediately I thought to myself, oh my goodness, somebody understands Asian American history here. Somebody understands that this day, Hiroshima Day, is important and that it means something to people and it's part of our living memory. It was all the more poetic, not only was yesterday Hiroshima Day, but here we are at the University of Chicago where the very first atomic reactor was built, right? In fact, if you go, it's just the next block, right behind the dorms there where we're staying. Here's the dorms. And right there is a monument to the first nuclear reactor that was ever built, 1942. It was part of the Manhattan Project here in America. And it's what led directly to both nuclear weapons, Hiroshima, but also what led to nuclear power, And that happened right here, the next block, right there. You can go visit. There I am running around, jogging. And so that all comes together, and in the worship setting, there are the cranes. And somebody recognizes, somebody knows the Asian story, the Asian American story, and I feel welcome. I feel like my story is included in such a place. This whole idea of Asian American, North American, Pacific Asian as an identity, Russel Yee mentioned that partly this is politics, right? Partly this is politics. And the idea of Asian American identity had its roots in politics. Here's UCLA Professor Yuji Ichioka, who passed away not that long ago. He was the first one to use the term Asian American. Asian American. Now you ask my parents were born in Oakland, they speak a little Chinese, not a lot. You ask them what they are, they actually might say Oriental. They grew up in a different time when Oriental was okay, it was not offensive. And they might actually say Oriental. If they don't say Oriental, they would definitely say Chinese. They would say Chinese. They would not say Asian American, because the idea of an Asian American Pacific Islander identity really only started in the 1970s or so. And this was during the civil rights movement, this was during the ethnic rights movement. And on campuses like UCLA, there was a movement to start ethnic studies programs, Black studies programs, Native American studies programs, Latino studies programs, and Asian American studies programs. But the idea of Asian America didn't exist yet. And so Professor Ichioka thought, well, if we just stay separate, Japanese studies program, Chinese studies program, Filipino studies program, Pacific Islander studies program, we'll never get anywhere because there's not enough of us. You have to have numbers, you have to have lots of people to have political weight, to go to the administration and say, we must have this for our people, right? And so he came up with this idea of Asian Americans as a group, as an identity, and that was just in the 70s. And so it's a very recent, very recent idea, very recent category. And even your own NAPAD movement, right, is about 30, 40 years old, around the same era, this idea of an emerging Asian Pacific American identity. So all very recent. And even the idea of a pan-Asian identity, Korea and China, Korea and Japan, let's say, they had a very bad time during the last war, right? There was a lot of very bad things happen, and it's not like they think of themselves as us, as we group, China and Japan, very bad, Japanese occupation of northern China and all these things that happened that were just terrible. And so, for Chinese and Japanese to think of themselves together as us, doesn't really happen in Asia. But here, Asian America, that can happen. So for instance, here I am with my two daughters, high school age daughters. And why are we dancing in my living room? We are dancing in my living room because it's my wife's birthday. And it was a big birthday, and so we decided to really have a big celebration. And so we did a K-pop song for her, a Korean pop song. The Nobody But You. Do you know this song? Nobody But You. And we did the whole thing. And for my wife. And, everybody in this picture is Chinese. We're not Korean, right? But my daughters are into K-pop, and so this Asian American identity could fit all of us, could fit us, right? Includes us, Chinese Americans. We can be Asian American along with Korean Americans and have that as part of our identity too. And so this Asian American identity spreads and grows. I myself grew up in Oakland at this church, the Chinese Independent Baptist Church of Oakland. It was founded, it's right in Oakland's Chinatown. It was the best thing, on Sunday, go to church in the morning and then go to Chinatown for lunch afterwards. Oh, that was the best. That was the best. Now I look back and I realize, oh my goodness, that was so unhealthy. All that salt and fat and all that fried food. Oh my goodness. That's why I run now, try to undo that. So I grew up there. That church was founded in the late 19th century by American Baptist home missionaries. These women, Mrs. Bradway and Miss Egley, so they came out of First Baptist Church of Oakland and, reached out to mostly bachelors. At that time there was discriminatory laws about immigration, the Chinese Exclusion Act. The Chinese Exclusion Act that you couldn't immigrate. And so it was mostly just bachelors living there in Chinatown. And I have to really hand it to these women. They are very proper white women. Probably in our day, these women would be able to, go to seminary and, become a denominational president, like your president, right? But at that time, they did things like became home missionaries. And so when nobody else would go to Chinatown, Chinatown at that time was the drug neighborhood of Oakland. That's where you went if you wanted opium, right? You wanted opium, drug neighborhood. That was the poor and dirty neighborhood. And that's in contrast to today. Today, it's not the poor and dirty neighborhood. It's more the rich and dirty neighborhood there in Chinatown. Banks on every corner. But here they were, these proper white, Caucasian women, bless them, reaching out to some of my ancestors there in Oakland's Chinatown to share the love of Jesus, in that bad neighborhood of Oakland. And that became my home church. And in the 1960s, my parents and their friends, they built this brand new sanctuary there in Oakland. And this is where I grew up, running around this sanctuary and playing. And this was the nicest building I was in all week, right? Nicer, newer than my house, my school, the nicest building I was in all week. And I loved it. It's brand new, my parents and their friends. About 20 families built this, My mother says the men of the church were at the construction site every night for months. Like, oh my goodness, I just cannot imagine, When I've been a pastor, it's like, I can't, if we can get 3 work days, that would be amazing, But every night for months, they built this for kids like me, and it was beautiful. And so this is where I grew up, and right in Chinatown, and it was a bilingual church, Cantonese and English. But it wasn't bicultural, really. The worship was very, very majority culture. We had the choir come in robes, and we sang Western hymns. And it was a very, just a very, very Western flavor of Christianity. And when I heard the gospel, and I'm glad I did, I heard about Jesus and sin and salvation and all those things, and I'm glad I heard those things. But I did hear them in a Western package, a Western cultural package. And so part of my journey has been, like Russel Moy, has been trying to explore that and to explore other places as well. So for instance, some years later, here's a house worship setting. Here's communion. And this is at my house, actually. And as you see the communion table, you see there's bread, and you see there's 2 cups. Now, one cup is white grape juice, okay? And the other cup is actually soy milk, it's soy milk. And this was not that long ago, but at that time, soy milk was still something, if you go to the supermarket, you find soy milk in the, ethnic food aisle, or the Asian food aisle, the Oriental food aisle of the supermarket, if you found it at all. Now, just in the last 10 years, that's all changed. Now you find soy milk right there, next to the cow milk, right at Costco. You guys got Costco here? Costco, Safeway or wherever. Soy milk is mainstream now. But at that time, it was very ethnic, minority food. So we had this worship service, and at this service, there was one worshiper. She was Hapa. She was half Asian, half Caucasian. And so after the service, after communion, we were talking about the service. And she said, when I took the soy milk for Jesus' blood, she said, it was the first time I'd ever thought of my Asian side being part of my Christian identity. The first time she'd ever thought of her Asian side as being part of her Christian identity. Now, I don't remember whether it was her father or her mother that was Asian, and which one was Christian, but she'd always thought of her Christianity as being part of her white half and not part of her Asian half. And it was this cup. It was soy milk, soy milk on the Lord's table that helped her make at least that one little connection between her, fully half of herself, half of who she is, had been disconnected from her Christian identity. And this soy milk helped open that door to that half of her identity. When it comes to matters of worship, a great place to start is with Jesus' answer to the question, what's the greatest commandment? Remember this question Jesus was asked, what's the greatest commandment? And what I love about it is that Jesus actually gives a straight answer. Jesus often doesn't give a straight answer. Sometimes he gives a cryptic answer or no answer, But for this question, he actually gives a straight answer. What's the most important commandment? And Jesus says, the most important one is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? The Shema from the Old Testament. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. All your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. And the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. Straight answer. All your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Now, we in the West, we're very analytical. We're thinking, okay, that must mean there's 4 parts of us, and this part does this, and that part does this, and we're going to love God with this part, that part. In the Hebrew way of thinking, it's more holistic. It's more like you're a whole person. And so heart, soul, mind, and strength basically just means love God with all you are.